Hello there, welcome back to Endless Histories. Today, we are looking at Mr. Tank Tank himself. The former number one in the Northwestern Valley, Thomas. And this cannon. But anyway. So, Thomas like, oh, the twos before World War II were built in World War I. It was fired up on May 14th, 1914. Anyway, so Thomas, like his older brothers, Andrew, the eldest, then Scott, then Sean, then Mark, started out his life as a self-peasant duck shunter. He was taught by his oldest brother Andrew how to be a good shunter, and also how to take trains. He had a really good relationship with all of his brothers, but Andrew especially. During his year with his brothers, he also worked at London Victoria as a station pilot, and also worked at King's Cross Station as well. Why? Well, this will make sense later on in this history. But all in all, he's a hard-working Indian. The following year, in 1915, it became apparent that way far away needed a station pilot. So, in May 1915, it was sold, or stolen, whatever, sent to the Northwestern Railway to be their station pilot at Vickerstown. He was also joined by Edward, who was sold, or stole, whatever, the same day as him. The sale didn't become official till July 1915, a few months later. But during that time, both engines worked hard. Thomas especially got along with Neil, and Neil took him under his wing, or wheels rather, just like his oldest brother Andrew had. He and Neil got along famously. Whenever Thomas and Sean, the fact that it was trained under a station master and member of the railway board, Mr. Gilbert Perkins, Miss Cannon, who worked for the LNER. Well, the Great Northern Railway was later resolved into the LNER. Allowed Thomas to pull a few trains of his own, giving him great pride in his work. The summer of 1915, he was joined by his little sister, Katie, who had helped the North Western Railway on behalf of the Great Northern Railway and the London Line South Coast Railway with finishing the project known as the Vickersham Bridge. She had been one of the few engines attached for the job. So her coming in to help out during the summer of 1915, back in the time period when there wasn't many trains, was a blessing. Even though she was head center at King's Cross Station. During this point, a J50 by the name of Michelle was also on the Northwestern. She enjoyed working with Thomas, even though Thomas was only a year younger than her. They were great friends. So anyway, Thomas and Michelle were time period together. After that summer, after Katie went back to King's Cross Station. Anyway. Though Thomas and Michelle enjoyed working together, till one fateful day she had an accident and was sent back to the mainland for repairs. But unbeknownst to the Northwestern Railway and the Great Northern, she ended up somewhere where engines shouldn't get nightmares from. Ugh. So unfortunately, Thomas had to work at a station pilot all by himself. Although Adam, one of the Northwestern Railway engines, kindly helped out. Along with Neil, so Thomas didn't feel the burn. In 1920, a new station pilot by the name of Dash officially joined the crew. And he and Thomas worked together famously. While his twin, Dash, who joined the Northwestern back in 1919, was the other end of the line. Plus, working at the Colin plant on the Northwestern Railway. With an extra rear buffers, Thomas was able to take more trains. Thus, more practice for him. In 1921, he went back to London. In a rather busy summer. This was one of the first times he had travelled off the Northwestern Railway. He worked with his sister again, and then last of the J50s, Paul and Ross, as well as Madison, also known as Maddie, Michelle's twin sister. He enjoyed the break from working on the island, and after his London visit came to an end in September 1921, he went back to the Northwestern, feeling more confident than ever. A little later, He welcomed a new engine officially to the fleet by the name of Henry, who helped down the Northwestern a few times. He has both trials successfully. Although with a few, well, with a little hiccup on his second trial, but nonetheless, it was successful. Thomas always made sure Henry had plenty time to steam up, and took extra care with shunting his train. This arrangement worked out well for the pair. Then, in 1923, Thomas went into the works for his first overhaul, which was rather quick. This was after the time Gordon joined the Northwestern officially. When Thomas returned from his overhaul the same year, another new engine had joined the fleet by the name of Theodore, although this arrangement was temporary. He and Theodore worked the Vickerstown yard successfully. Then after that, the Northwestern Railway moved down to Catford Station, using it as the main hub for the railway, though leaving Vickerstown Station as it was. Thomas and Dash officially became station pilots at Catford Station. In December 1923, the Northwestern Railway officially unveiled another shunter, her sea purchased by Southern Railway, which was the home to Thomas's siblings. This engine name was Bruno, the same class as Theodore. Bruno was a happy chappy, and went about his work without no fuss or complaining. It was also during that time that Thomas and the engines of the Northwestern loved the sport called horse racing. As they loved hearing tales of horses winning across Europe, especially from those who visit the Northwestern. From the rest of the 1920s, Thomas, Bruno, and Dash worked together in harmony. In 1930, Thomas's sister Katie visited the island again during the summer. She was a welcome sight of the Northwestern Fleet. Also during this time, Thomas officially received the Farquhar branch line in 1930 after rescuing James after a crash that he had running into a cow field. Whap, whap, whap. But Thomas didn't mind this. His sister got to work on the ranch hunting with him during her summer visit. This was exciting to her. She happily talked to her brother about her own branch line. With Thomas' hope, he would get to help work on next time he was called out to London. Yeah, that's... Anyway. After Key's visit in 1930, that summer turned into fall. One more engine joined joined the Northwestern Railway as a station pilot. Thomas was relieved to have someone take over his work. His name was Daffy. And he was a good friend. He was also a brother to both Bruno and Theodore. Everyone loved him. In between trips, on his own branch line, Thomas would hear the news from Edward and Henry. Plus, we would go visit the station yard at Gafford Station and chat with his friends. In 1932, he was again called up to London, as Katie's branch line needed the extra buffer. Thomas had never been to Manchester before, but Katie was happy to explain to her brother how the branch line works, and he understood. But he wasn't as cheeky as he used to be, however. Working with his sister made him humble. It made him understand the importance of hard work. Thomas loved being on Katie's branch line in summer of 1932. It was the second time in his career, in Northwestern Railway career, he had been away from the island. It wouldn't be the last, however. So, after that visit, he remained on the Northwestern Railway until 1938. In December 1938, he was called up to London again, filling in for his sister as she was still in overhaul. Why? Well, she had been abandoned by her and her brother's first controller, the man whose name shall not be spoken, as he was also the one responsible for mistreating his brothers. Learning him, Andreas used to work under him, which had left the trays that worked under him scarred. Which trays are we talking about? Go back to the history of the trays that worked under this man and this cannon. Thomas was relieved, however, to be spending Christmas with his brothers, though. It was also then he found out he was getting a baby brother. And the next year, when he returned to Sodor, In February 1939, he happily told the rest of the island about his newest brother. He went back to running the Farquhar branch line without any problems. Theodore had been one of the extra engines called in to run the Farquhar branch for him while Thomas had been away. Thomas was only supposed to stay in London from the month of December to January. However, the contract got extended to February, as it was still going to take a bit of time to get Thomas's sister Katie back into scene. In June 1939, as the war had been declared, Thomas had received word from one of the station masters that his little sister had been bought by the LNER, officially welcoming her into a fresh start. Officially welcoming her as one of their own. Although her contract that she had when she's still been owned by the Southern Railway, which allowed her to work King's Cross Station for the LNER, so as the former Great Northern, was over. In response to that, as part of the deal, she no longer worked under Victoria as a station pilot. Thomas was a little surprised by this, but he understood why. So, for the rest of World War II, he and the engines helped out the best they could. When Gordon had to go away in late 1941, when the LNER was contracted by the War Department to send extra help, Katie returned to the island after her visit, this time staying on the Northwestern for the rest of the war, filling in for Gordon, along with a few other engines. This didn't bother Thomas a bit, though. As he and his sister had a good relationship, although he was rather overprotective of her, as Edward pointed out to Henry quite a few times. Even though Katie had been contracted to help fill in for Gordon, and now been brought in at this point into co-ownership by both the LNER and the Northwestern, she was pushed a few times to help Thomas on his branch line. When Soldov was contracted in 1943 to help bring injured soldiers home to Wellsworth Hospital, to the different hospitals on the island, as well as to Battle and Furness, to be transferred to hospitals on the mainland in the countryside. Thomas and Katie were sometimes assigned to work on trains together. During this point, the pair had met an engine called Hero and been temporarily assigned to the Northwestern Fleet for the war. However, Thomas was a bit worried that Hero would have to go back to Japan after the war ended. However, In 1947, when Thomas took a train to Battle of Furness on his birthday on May 14th, 1947, I was surprised to find out that the Northwestern Railway officially bought Hero. Making him a permanent member and saved him from going back to Japan. Thomas was thrilled by this. However, it was also on this day, he looked over the little area that used to be the home to Edward's old line, old railway, the Furness Railway. Thomas wondered if that was ever going to be used again. So, from that point on, Thomas ran and ran, always without any hiccups. In 1955, he was removed from the Farquhar branch for his overhaul. Bruno was removed from station pilot duties and was sent to the Farquhar branch to cover for him. Thomas remained under overhaul until 1957, when he returned to steam. This time, Bruno had officially been permanently assigned to the Farquhar branch. Was made Thomas thrilled. He was happy to share the goods work and passengers with him. It wasn't easy, Thomas and Bruno would sometimes say, whenever they visit each other nowadays. But anyway, from that point onward, things went well. There was also Toby, a part of the Northwestern as well, running trains to the Norfolk Quarry and back, taking the workmen to the quarry and come again at night. Although we're not going to talk about a certain cell tank engine, it was also part of the branch. In 1961, Thomas was reunited with a sibling, or rather, reunited with a sibling. Sort of. Anyway. The engine, who was Leo, on K106, eventually was bought by the Northwestern Railway. At the time, engines were being scrapped on the other railway. However, he got along well with his older brother, Bruno and Toby. Of course, he didn't get along with that engine who shall not be named. As they were arguing for hours on end. Ugh. Whenever Thomas, Toby, and Bruno were not in sight. Ugh. So the rest of the 1960s were got free almost for Thomas. In 1967, beginning that year, Gordon and Thomas both received the visit from the Flying Scotsman, Gordon's younger brother. On account as the peace offering who had been owned at the time by Alan Pegler. Alan Pegler, who Thomas later found out was also a good friend of his sister. In April 1967, the Northwestern quietly welcomed home an engine that had been lost. Who? Well, we'll find out next week. Anyway, so in 1968, Thomas went into the works for his next overhaul, leaving the engine who had been welcomed back the previous year to raise some revenue duties quite earlier than anticipated. However, this was a secret to Thomas, because nobody told him. He spent the rest of 1968 till January 1972 in Oval. It took longer than expected this time around, as parts for him were coming a little scarce. So new ones had to be named. It still got a long time. Money had also been raised for a new boiler and firebox. As both his firebox and water had become worn out along with the tubes. There were cracks in the tubes. In fact, it took 16 months to build his new firebox and another 16 months to build his new boiler. On January 3rd, 1972, he was seen up for the first time outside the works and ran some steam tests, as well as passing the printing test, which he passed with flying colors thanks to the new boiler and firebox. To this day, Thomas had no idea how long it took for both the firebox and the boiler to be built. Thomas didn't mind, though. Even if he had been told, he wouldn't have minded. After the day of testing was over, except that's he went back into the works for a repaint. Well, almost a repaint. He wore works gray for 3 more days, and then was painted into the green you see him in today. The old London Blend South Coast green was the fat control of one at the time, which was Sir Stephen Topham Hatt, and wanted Thomas to represent his heritage, with he in mind. Thomas ran in the Southern Green, the London so close for their weight clean, to May 1975, when it was reprinted back into Northwestern Railway blue. In 1976, he was invited to the Bluebell Railway. The Norfolk Railway, my bad. To run shuttle trains. He was reunited with an old friend of his, Victor the K2, Everett's twin brother, during this time. And the two happily chatted together. After this visit, Victor officially employed by the Northwestern, and he joined back with Thomas, and he took up the mantle of being a Vickerstown station pilot. In addition to running on the main line. Thomas also became mainline certified in 1977 for the rest of the year. Yes. To take a train known as the Local, which ran from Catford Station to Ballin-Furness. In 1979, his mainline certification ticket ran out, and he returned to the Farquhar branch. In 1980, he welcomed a new member to the Farquhar fleet, known as Tony, Hobie's twin brother. With having an extra buffer with the stolen trains, gave Thomas an extra break or two. The rest of the 1980s saw him busy on his branch line. Then in April 1990, Sir Stephen Doublehead got a call from the National Railway Museum in York, inviting Thomas join them to join the engines at the museum for the great for the for the time period, as well as laying a helping buffer with taking trains around the demonstration lines at the museum. Thomas was thrilled when he was told the news. We soon left for the National Railway Museum. Where he remained until June 1991. When he returned in June 1991, another engine had joined the Farquhar branch. No, it wasn't his sister. Nope. It was Daffy. Thomas has been pleased with this. So the rest of the 1990s went off almost unofficial, with a few minor hiccups. Unfortunately, 1997, the Northwestern Railway lost Sir Charles Topham Hatt. The man was saved the Northwestern Railway from doom. but he'll use the finances and such from his father, who hasn't been part of a scheme that involved Michelle the J50. Although, if you ask her nowadays, I did not talk about it. So, 1998, beginning in 1998, it was one of the worst winters that I've ever had. But Thomas and the rest of the crew pulled through. And that was that. The rest of Thomas's history, pretty much. 2001, he went back to the works for another overhaul. This one took the same amount of time as the other ones. Ugh. This time, it was mainline certified for 2 years, pulling the local again. After the ticket ended in 2004, he remained in the Farquhar branch. However, sadly, things started to go wrong for the little blue hero. Why? Well, in 2020, after so many faithful years of working on both the Northwestern Main Line as a station pilot, Vicarstown, then Effort Station, then running the Farquhar branch, working in London, helping his sister out her old branch line that's still around today, he started to show that it was no longer capable of running the Farquhar branch. It was also around this time that Norfolk Quarry closed down as it ran out of stone. However, in 1925, the area is being reused for something else. Why am I saying this? Well, this will be explained in Thomas's Sisters Ending History a bit further next time. But anyway, because Thomas was someone who was no longer capable of working on the Farquhar branch, he was sold to the Vicarstown Preservation Society. In 1921. Excuse me, in 2021. Where they leave him of all and the Krovensky Works, where all their engines get repairs. Thomas was later joined the same year by Toby. Then a few years later, they were joined by Oliver and Douglas. And the last member, currently, Stepney. Nowadays, Thomas works at the museum that he calls home, doing light work and building a little mini branch line to service Little Vicarstown. You ask him if he misses working on the No Fester? Really? He says, sometimes. But I'm happy being a museum engine. At least I get to be really useful. And that is the history of Thomas. Everyone's headcanon is different. Well, this is the end of history for Thomas for this one. Thank you so much for watching. Next week, Thomas' sister Katie gets the spotlight for her. And in history, no boy is a mouthful. Just like Thomas says. Well, and so we'll see you all next week. Bye.